In today's world, relationships are often reduced to surface level exchanges. People equate love with gifts, validation with attention, and depth with appearance. Yet the psychology of women reveals something far more profound. A woman may appreciate material things, but her soul doesn't attach to them. She attaches to emotion. Emotional connection is not about constant communication or grand gestures. It's about resonance, that invisible frequency that makes her feel seen, safe, and significant. When that connection exists, everything else fades into the background. A woman's emotional world is complex, layered, and deeply intuitive. She reads the energy in a room before she hears a single word. She feels the truth behind your tone before she processes the meaning of your sentence. That is why a woman can often sense insincerity even when words sound perfect. To her, connection is about congruence, your words, tone, and actions aligning with authenticity. When they don't, no amount of gifts or luxuries can fill the emotional gap she feels inside. You can give a woman a diamond, but if she feels unseen, it loses its sparkle. You can take her to the most beautiful place, but if your presence feels emotionally disconnected, she'll remember the emptiness instead of the view. What women crave, more than possessions or promises, is to feel emotionally understood. Understanding is the real luxury. When she feels understood, she relaxes into your presence. When she doesn't, she overthinks, questions, withdraws, and emotionally detaches, no matter how much you spend or how often you try to please her. The emotional connection begins with attunement. Attunement means being emotionally aware, reading subtle cues, responding to energy, and understanding what's being communicated beyond words. For example, when a woman grows quiet during a conversation, an emotionally aware man doesn't rush to fill the silence. He observes, listens, and senses the emotional temperature. He asks not to interrogate, but to connect. He doesn't fix, he feels. This is what builds safety. Women associate safety with emotional intelligence. They feel safest with men who are calm, consistent, and compassionate. Not perfect, not emotionless, but present. Presence doesn't mean proximity. You can sit next to someone physically, but still feel emotionally alone. Presence means you're mentally and emotionally there. When she speaks, you're not waiting to respond, you're trying to understand. When she shares her fears or pain, you don't minimize them with logic, you validate them with empathy. In psychology, empathy is often misunderstood. It's not agreement, it's acknowledgement. It's the ability to say, I see how you feel and your feelings make sense. This sentence, when said with authenticity, creates a deeper impact than any designer gift. Because emotional connection touches her sense of identity, her need to be seen, not for her looks, not for her performance, but for her essence. Every woman has a hidden emotional map. Some call it intuition, others call it sensitivity. It's the internal guidance system that helps her sense who truly values her. Men who understand this don't play emotional games. They build emotional safety through consistency. They don't promise the world, they show the world through energy. Emotional connection thrives in truth, not theatrics. A woman's nervous system is wired to respond to emotional cues. When she feels tension, she withdraws. When she feels empathy, she softens. When she senses chaos, she builds walls. This isn't manipulation, it's biology. The female brain processes emotion through the limbic system, the emotional core of the mind, far more actively than the male brain. That's why emotional neglect impacts women differently. It's not about being overly sensitive. It's about emotional wiring. When a man dismisses her emotions, her brain registers it as disconnection. When he attunes, her brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone that deepens attachment. This is why material things alone can't replace emotional understanding. You can't buy oxytocin with money. You can't replace empathy with luxury. You can't replace presence with performance. Women remember how you make them feel long after they forget what you gave them. That feeling becomes the emotional fingerprint you leave on her heart. The danger many men fall into is thinking that love can be maintained through logic and provision alone. They assume that as long as they're providing, they're connecting. But provision without presence creates emptiness. A woman will never feel secure in wealth if she's poor in emotional connection. When she says she wants to talk, she doesn't want to debate, she wants to connect. When she asks questions, she's not interrogating, she's trying to understand her place in your emotional world. To connect with a woman emotionally, a man must first understand himself emotionally. Emotional connection requires emotional literacy, the ability to identify, express, and regulate your own emotions. If a man suppresses his emotions, he becomes emotionally unavailable. If he reacts impulsively, he becomes emotionally unstable. Women can sense both. The emotionally connected man knows when to express vulnerability and when to hold composure. He doesn't overshare, but he doesn't hide. He communicates openly without being overwhelmed by his feelings. Psychologically, women respond to vulnerability when it's expressed with strength. Vulnerability without stability feels chaotic. Stability without vulnerability feels cold. The balance of both creates intimacy. Emotional connection, therefore, isn't about constant emotional exposure. It's about emotional alignment. A woman connects most when she feels your emotions align with truth, integrity, and respect. In long-term relationships, emotional connection determines the survival of love. When connection fades, resentment grows. Many couples break up not because of betrayal or conflict, but because of emotional disconnection that went unnoticed for too long. The small moments, the ignored emotions, the distracted conversations, the dismissed feelings slowly build emotional distance. Once that distance forms, material gestures can't repair it. You can't solve emotional starvation with gifts. You solve it with understanding. The paradox of emotional connection is that it demands vulnerability, yet most people fear it. Fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing control, all block authentic emotional exchange. But women by nature crave that authenticity. When a man opens up genuinely without expectation or manipulation, she feels invited into his emotional world. That's when her guard drops. That's when she starts to trust. Trust in the female psyche is emotional safety. It's built not through promises, but through patterns. It's not the "I'll always be here" statement that matters. It's the consistency of being there that builds her belief. Each time you listen without judgment, each time you validate her feelings, each time you remain emotionally steady in her storm, she registers safety. Safety creates connection. Connection creates attraction. Attraction sustains love. That is the emotional sequence most men overlook. Attraction is not maintained through appearance alone. It's maintained through emotional resonance. The more emotionally connected she feels, the more deeply she attaches. This attachment isn't dependency, it's alignment. When a woman feels emotionally connected, her entire demeanor changes. She becomes softer, more receptive, more nurturing. Her defenses drop, her tone changes, her energy becomes peaceful. She doesn't have to chase affection or force communication because the connection flows naturally. She mirrors the emotional state you create. If you're calm, she reflects calm. If you're anxious, she absorbs anxiety. A woman is like emotional water. She takes the shape of the container she's in. That's why emotional leadership in men is so powerful. Emotional leadership doesn't mean dominance. It means emotional regulation. It means staying grounded when emotions rise. It means responding thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively. When a man can hold emotional space for both his feelings and hers, he becomes emotionally magnetic. She doesn't connect to control, she connects to emotional steadiness. In counseling psychology, this is often referred to as secure attachment behavior. A secure man doesn't fear emotional intimacy, he understands its power. He doesn't suppress emotion to appear strong. He expresses emotion responsibly to build strength in connection. This emotional maturity creates a sense of depth that material wealth cannot replicate. Money can buy experiences, but not emotional safety. Gifts can impress temporarily, but only emotional depth leaves a permanent imprint. When a man speaks with presence, listens with intent, and feels with empathy, he becomes unforgettable. Because what women value most isn't perfection, it's emotional alignment. Emotional alignment means your energy matches your words. You don't say, I care while acting indifferent. You don't say, I'm here while being emotionally absent. You don't promise connection while prioritizing distractions. When she senses alignment, she feels emotionally safe. When she senses dissonance, she begins to detach, even if she still loves you. Emotional disconnection doesn't always happen loudly. Sometimes it happens quietly over time through small neglects that go unnoticed until it's too late. Many men underestimate how deeply women register emotional inconsistency. A woman may not confront it directly, but she feels it deeply. When your tone shifts, she senses distance. When your energy fades, she feels rejection. When your focus diverts, she internalizes the loss. That's why emotional connection is not built once. It's maintained daily through awareness and intention. Every conversation is an opportunity to deepen or damage emotional connection. Every moment of distraction or empathy defines whether she feels emotionally nourished or emotionally starved. That's why emotionally aware men don't rush communication. They listen more than they speak, not to appear passive, but to understand emotional texture, the emotions beneath the words. Women rarely communicate feelings directly. Instead, they express them through stories, metaphors, or moods. Emotional intelligence means reading between those lines. When she talks about her day, she's not just narrating events, she's revealing emotional experiences. When she talks about a conflict, she's testing whether you understand her emotional reality. Responding with logic alone fails the test. Responding with empathy passes it. An emotionally intelligent man doesn't fear her emotions. He sees them as data, emotional information guiding him toward understanding. He doesn't correct her feelings, he explores them. He doesn't compete with her emotions, he co-regulates them. This co-regulation, the ability to maintain calmness and presence while she's emotional, builds deep emotional intimacy. Intimacy in its truest form is not physical closeness, but emotional transparency. A woman's body may be with you, but if her heart feels unseen, the relationship will feel empty. You can't touch what you haven't emotionally reached. You can't attract what you haven't emotionally understood. The bridge between two people isn't built by effort alone, it's built by emotional understanding. When you understand emotional connection, you begin to realize how deeply it shapes attraction, respect, and long term love. Attraction without emotional safety fades. Respect without emotional understanding weakens. Love without emotional connection collapses. The emotional connection is the invisible thread that holds everything together. It's also the reason some women stay loyal even when life gets difficult. not because of circumstances, but because of the emotional bond. When that bond is strong, she feels that no matter what happens externally, the internal connection remains. When that bond weakens, no amount of effort can reignite what emotional disconnection has killed. Men often confuse emotional connection with emotional dependence, but they are opposites. Dependence is need, connection is choice. When a woman feels emotionally connected, she chooses to stay. When she doesn't, she chooses distance. Her loyalty is not to comfort, it's to emotional truth. This is why emotionally intelligent men are rare, because they build relationships on awareness, not assumption. They understand that a woman's heart doesn't respond to performance, but to presence. You can't impress her into love. You have to connect her into it. When you understand her emotions, you speak her language. When you ignore them, you create silence that no words can repair. Emotional connection over material things is not a rejection of provision, it's a redefinition of value. True value lies in understanding, consistency, and emotional presence, the things money can't buy, but every woman deeply desires. Emotional connection makes her feel safe to be soft, safe to express, and safe to love without fear of being unseen. It gives her the freedom to trust that she is emotionally held, not just physically or financially supported. When she feels that, she doesn't crave luxury, she craves you. When she feels emotionally understood, she no longer needs reassurance. Your energy becomes reassurance itself. And when that happens, the relationship transcends surface level attraction and becomes something sacred, rooted not in material things, but in emotional truth, in relationship psychology. Few truths are as understated yet as powerful as this one. Attention is a woman's oxygen. It is what keeps her emotionally alive, validated, and connected. Attention to a woman is not about ego, it's about emotional acknowledgement. It is how she knows she matters. The same way air sustains the body, attention sustains her emotional world. Take it away for too long and her spirit begins to suffocate. Attention in this context isn't about control or flattery, it's about presence. A woman doesn't crave constant validation because she's needy. She craves attention because it affirms her emotional significance. Women are relational beings by nature. From childhood, their brains are wired to interpret emotional cues, facial expressions, and tone more acutely than men. That heightened sensitivity makes attention more than a desire, and it becomes a form of emotional communication. When a man gives his attention intentionally, she receives it as love. When he withholds it, she receives it as rejection. Modern relationships often misunderstand this. Men are taught that giving less attention makes them appear more powerful, more mysterious, but the psychology of attraction doesn't work that way for women. What pulls her closer is not scarcity, but attunement. When she feels that your attention is rooted in awareness rather than performance, she feels emotionally safe. When she feels ignored, she doesn't chase, she begins to detach. Her silence becomes protection, not indifference. For a woman, attention is multidimensional. It's not just about listening to words, it's about noticing details. The subtle changes in her tone, the way she dresses, the shift in her energy when she's unspokenly hurt. To her, every unnoticed moment communicates emotional distance. Every observed detail communicates care. That's why she often tests your awareness without directly asking for it. When she changes her hairstyle, she notices if you notice. When she's quiet, she notices if you ask. These moments are not trivial. They are micro tests of emotional presence. Psychologically, attention fulfills a woman's emotional need for visibility. Visibility is the experience of being seen, not for her physical appearance, but for her inner state. When she feels visible, she feels valued. When she feels invisible, she begins to question her worth in the relationship. This emotional pattern is deeply rooted in attachment theory. In secure relationships, consistent attention builds trust. In inconsistent relationships, neglect triggers anxiety. A woman doesn't need you to solve all her problems. She needs you to witness them. Attention communicates witnessing. When you give her your undivided focus, you're not just hearing her story, you're validating her emotional experience. That validation regulates her nervous system, grounding her emotionally. It's the difference between emotional safety and emotional starvation. Many men underestimate the power of small gestures. Attention doesn't always mean grand displays of affection. Sometimes it's a simple text that says, "I remembered what you said earlier," or a soft glance across a crowded room that says, "I still see you." These small moments create emotional intimacy. They tell her, "You still occupy my mental space even when I'm not physically around." That awareness feeds her emotional need for connection. In the absence of attention, emotional distance begins to grow quietly. A woman rarely leaves suddenly. Long before she physically walks away, she emotionally detaches. That detachment begins when she feels unseen for too long. At first, she may overcompensate, trying harder, talking more, seeking acknowledgement. But when her efforts go unnoticed, her energy begins to fade. Her tone changes. Her laughter becomes guarded. She starts giving you the same indifference she once begged you not to give her. It's not revenge, it's self-preservation. Psychology explains this through the concept of reciprocal energy exchange. Emotional investment needs feedback. When a woman gives attention without receiving it, she experiences an imbalance. Over time, that imbalance creates emotional fatigue. She stops reaching out because her nervous system has learned that attention won't be reciprocated. That's how emotional withdrawal begins, not with anger, but with quiet acceptance of neglect. Attention also represents emotional safety. When a man pays attention, he communicates stability. He signals, "You can relax here, I'm aware." This awareness creates trust, and trust fuels intimacy. In contrast, inconsistency, hot and cold patterns of attention, creates anxiety. The female brain interprets inconsistent attention as unpredictability, which activates the amygdala, the part responsible for fear and stress responses. That's why inconsistency feels like emotional chaos to women. It's not about control, it's about neurological safety. For a woman, attention equals connection. Connection equals security. When you take away attention, she starts to feel disconnected. When she feels disconnected, her body registers that as threat. Her mind begins to overthink, analyze, and create emotional scenarios to understand what went wrong. This is not overreaction, it's emotional pattern recognition. Women's brains are built to connect patterns in emotional behavior. That's why they notice subtle changes men often overlook. A man who understands the value of attention doesn't fear giving it. He gives it with awareness, not obsession. He knows that attention doesn't mean losing independence. It means cultivating emotional intelligence. He can listen without distraction, respond without